around the world, a very warm welcome to Outlook with me, your host, Mohammed Shafiq. As I said, we're broadcasting around the world here in the UK on Sky Channel 743. We're on social media and we're also across the world on satellite. Wherever you are, a very warm welcome. You join us on an evening which is packed with so much news happening around the world. We have the ongoing crisis and confrontations between Syrian government forces and Kurdish rebels, as they are described by the government there. We have the final body of an Israeli soldier has been found in Gaza and returned to Israel. And Prime Minister Netanyahu has agreed for the second stage of the agreement to be implemented, with the Palestinians arguing for more aid and a withdrawal of Israeli troops. We'll be talking about that. And obviously, in the United States, we've seen another shooting of a civilian in Minnesota. This is by the immigration forces that have been trying to capture people who are under allegations of being illegal immigrants. And they're in Minnesota. This is the second shooting in less than a month. We'll be talking about that as well. And wider, what do the midterm elections? So every November, every 2 years, the US Congress, the whole of the US Congress and a quarter of the Senate have elections. And those elections are coming. Obviously, Donald Trump won in 2024 with a massive mandate. He took the House, he took the Senate, and he also took the White House. So we'll be seeing what the midterms will be predicted to happen in those elections. But more importantly, what impact will that have on Donald Trump's final 2 years in office? My special guest is a foreign policy expert who is based in Washington, D.C. Hamdi Rafai is joining us. Hamdi, assalamu alaikum. I know you snowed under with this massive weather in the United States. How is it having a snow day in the United States during this storm?
Well, spending it with you makes it much better.
Allah bless you. Allah bless you. Thank you so much. If you're joining us, as I said, colleagues, viewers, if you want to join us on the conversation, the number is on the screen now. Please do call in to the live studio. We'll be taking your calls as well on Syria, on Gaza, on the shooting in the United States as well, and wider political issues. Hamdi, you're joining us from Washington, D.C. From your vantage point, how would you describe the current global movement? We are seeing multiple crises in the Middle East. We've seen deep divisions in the United States in current weeks. How do you see the outlook of global politics?
I think the general impression that you saw coming out of the World Economic Forum is reflective of the reality that we are all living through right now, which is instability, uncertainty, distrust of the United States, realignment of world powers. And I think that pervades everything that's occurring. So what we're seeing is that Trump is playing a much larger role in his second term than he did during his first term. During his first term, people were able to discount him to some extent, and he had a much smaller impact on the world. Now we see that NATO is really questioning what role the United States has within NATO. We're seeing that the Middle East is realigning. We're seeing Iran in turmoil. We're seeing, for the first time, the United States in turmoil. This is a world that most people are unfamiliar with. It's become almost impossible to predict what's going to happen next. But, it's certainly, some of the changes are positive changes, we can say with certainty. But there are a lot of the changes that I think that we all have to question and say, well, there's that old saying, be careful what you wish for, but because you may get it. A lot of people are saying, oh, well, we looked for some of these things, and now we wish we weren't getting them.
Yeah, that's interesting. Let's start with Syria. Obviously, the last time we spoke at a different platform, our minds wouldn't even think that the Assad regime would fall after the brutality of the last 10, 12 years. Assad has now fallen. Ahmed al-Sharaa is the new president. Kurdish forces were once allies of the United States and international community. They're now appearing to be extremely vulnerable from Syrian forces who are attacking them. What does this erosion of Kurdish autonomy in the northeast Syria mean for regional stability?
Well, I think that we need to take a step back to answer that because you're referencing them as Kurdish forces. So for years we've been hearing from journalists, elected officials, virtually everyone that talks about the situation in Syria as the SDF is the Kurds. But I think that there's a major point here that we need to make clear, which is the SDF was not the Kurds. The SDF was an organization that is now defunct and was controlled by the YPG, which was the Syrian arm of the PKK. But the soldiers, and 60% of that fighting force at least, was made up of Arabs. So when they kept talking about it as the Kurds, well, that was never accurate back when they had done it previously. And we've seen that that fighting force of Arabs that were compelled to be part of the SDF have all defected and are being regularized and returned to being part of the Syrian government forces. So now we have the SDF has shrunk in size in the snap of a finger, from what they had claimed was 100,000 fighting force to, if I was to estimate it now, I would say maybe it's 20,000. And they referred to it previously as the Kurds. Maybe now it might be accurate to refer to it as the Kurds in some sense, in that those that are fighting in those ranks of the YPG and PKK are mostly Kurdish, overwhelmingly Kurdish, but they certainly do not represent the Kurdish people, because as we've seen also, as areas east of the Euphrates have been liberated from the STF, YPG, PKK terrorists, the Kurds have been celebrating. The Kurdish people have in those areas have been celebrating. So they're leaving those areas through humanitarian corridors created by the Syrian government, and they're happy to see what was previously called the Kurds getting defeated.
Yeah, I mean, the Kurds would often argue they're overlooked. They've been abandoned by global powers. They don't have autonomy. They don't have their rights, human rights. But actually, President al-Sharaa made that historic speech where he put Kurdish autonomy, citizenship for all Kurds, Kurdish language, the culture, and holidays to be respected. Is this an historic turning point in Syria's fragile country?
I personally do not see it as a historic turning point because Kurdish people in Syria were never deprived their rights by this government. They were never deprived their rights by the Syrian people. They were deprived their rights by Assad, the war criminal that was defeated. But all Syrians were deprived their rights by Assad, the war criminal that was defeated. So for them to single themselves out as they were being discriminated by Syrians because of being Kurdish is very, very misleading. So I don't see this as being historic because they were never deprived their rights by Syrians. Many Syrians have Kurdish ancestry or heritage, so that Arabic families have Kurds in them, Kurdish families have Arabs in them. So I don't see this as being any change because there was never any discrimination against Kurds within society to start with, other than from the state, the Assad state. So I think this idea that Kurds are somehow discriminated against is really something created by Israel, created by the PKK to justify their terror on larger society. And we see now a good 60-70% of the misinformation accounts and people that are talking about Kurdish rights are Israeli. They're not even Kurdish
Mm.
people. You don't see Kurdish people that are Syrians, that are part of Syrian society, talking about this. You see Iranian illegal migrant Kurds who came to Syria to take land talking about this. You see Iraqi Kurds who came to Syria only within the recent history to take territory talking about this. But Syrian Kurds, it's almost impossible to find one that's talking about discrimination against Kurds by Syrians or by Ahmed al-Sharaa.
Yeah, that's really interesting and fascinating when we saw these attacks by the Syrian government military into those Kurdish areas in the northeast of Syria. We've seen an uptick in violence
But Mohammed,
between
Mohammed, I don't mean to
Syrian.
interrupt you, but there are no Kurdish
Sure.
areas in Syria. The east of the Euphrates, the areas that have already been liberated from the SDF, YPG, PKK terror groups are 90% or more Arab, and many of those areas are actually Assyrian Christian. None of them have a majority Kurdish population, and even those areas
Mm,
that have a large Kurdish population, it's very small, 10, 15%. The overall area only has a Kurdish population of maybe 7%. To talk about there being Kurdish areas in Syria is very misleading because that doesn't exist.
mm. Okay, thank you. Well, thank you for clarifying that, and I'm sure people might be interested in calling in and asking questions on that. There is a sense that since the Syrian troops entered into those areas, we've seen an uptick in violence between Syrian Arabs and Kurds. Here in the United Kingdom, we know we've had some violence. I don't know what it's like in the United States. Is there a fear of further division around the world between Syrian Kurds and Syrian Arabs?
Uh, let's talk about these groups. These groups in Sweden, in the United Kingdom, in Germany, that we've seen bringing this violence to the streets of Europe. These are diaspora extremists that none of them are even Syrian. Very few of them are actually even from Syria. And the ones that are from Syria were recent immigrants within the past 50 years. So these are not Syrians, traditional Syrians, as we know them. They're not part of the culture, etc. They are people who are very far to the left, Marxists, people who are looking to create Kurdistan, activists who are trying to create Kurdistan. If you spend even a few minutes researching this, you'll find that Rojava, this is a fiction. This is a fiction created by these separatists, these ethnocentric separatists. And we see this phenomenon of extremism by diaspora communities in almost every group. So we see that amongst Armenians in the diaspora were much more extreme than Armenians in Armenia. They were being
Mm,
pushed by the diaspora people. This is a phenomenon that we see over and over and over and over. People who have nothing to lose, who are not within that area, who have no situational awareness of the lives of those people and the risks, are able to just say things without any concern about how reckless or not true or true those things are.
yeah, we know that cars were damaged here where I come from in Manchester, here in the United Kingdom, and there was a significant number of arrests that were carried out on the streets of Manchester last week. But what do you make of President al-Shara's statement that he is going to offer citizenship and passports and the Kurdish language, the Kurdish culture to these people in these areas that have been liberated, as you claim?
This is a position all Syrians have held for a long, long time, that Kurds that are actually from Syria are Syrians, and they have the same
Mm,
rights as any other Syrian. This is not something unique. It was something denied to them by the Assad regime because the Assad regime would use the Kurds, and he would use their grievances as a beating stick against Turkey. It was used for geopolitical reasons. So give with one hand, take away with the other, and use them as a tool along the border against Turkey. And we see that that is the lifestyle and that is what they were trying to create. They weren't trying to create a Kurdish state. They've now had 10 years of American money, of Syrian oil, to fund infrastructure to create a Kurdish state in these areas of the Euphrates. Instead, they were digging tunnels, buying weapons, imprisoning children. Even the roads are impassable. There's no infrastructure. They used these 10 years to be violent and to pursue that extremist agenda instead of building a state.
And how do you see President al-Shira's record so far as being president? He's the interim president until presidential elections and the constitution. But he's made a mark on international politics and diplomacy and put Syria in a much stronger position than they were under Assad.
So geopolitically, he's played everything exactly correct. But I think it's more than just geopolitically. He is a son of Syria. He has learned the lessons of his mistakes of the past, and he is a Syrian in every way, shape, and form. So he understands what Syrians want. He understands where we were going. He understands the culture of Syria. And because of that, he's been able to do most things correctly. Now, of course, you see people criticize him, but you have a state that is literally a nation that was destroyed. He's not going to turn over the nation overnight. 1 year is not long enough to fix the problems of the past. However, in that time, he has made substantial changes. Electricity is available to people. Cars are being made available to people. The price of food has come down. The currency is being fixed. Everything that was a problem in the past is now changing and becoming better. Syrians' lives are becoming better. Syrians are able to criticize the government. Syrians are able to walk the streets. This is a whole new existence that is completely unfamiliar to Syrians. And this is all because of Ahmed al-Sharaa, because he has taken a stance of being a responsible player on the world stage, not going to war with neighbors, even though Israel and others have tried to go to war with him.
Yeah. How do you see the dynamics of President Erdogan of Turkey and his role in the overthrow of Assad? And how do you see relationships between Syria and Turkey developing?
I think it's a very healthy relationship that Ahmad al-Sharaa has with Erdogan. It's a very healthy relationship that Syria has with Turkey. Turkey has played a very positive and constructive role throughout this period since 2015, when it really got heavily involved in Syria. And I think that when you look at the military role that Turkey has played in Syria, of providing weapons, of providing heavy equipment, providing training, providing the tools to build a new state, you can see that Turkey has been very responsible. Everything that Turkey has provided is mostly defensive, in order to build policing, in order to secure the borders, in order to bring stability back to Syria, where it's obviously been lacking for many years. And Turkey understands what most nations have not understood, which is that, the PKK, YPG is a terror group. Other states, like the United States, did designate the PKK as a terror group, but it never acted on it. It did really very much the opposite. It partnered with the PKK in Syria under this rebranded name of the SDF and ignored the fact that they're terrorists. Only now is the United States finally beginning to acknowledge that it made a big mistake there and that it was partnered with terrorists. So Turkey led them to that place.
Yeah, Turkey led them to the place, but also we are seeing PKK now have a ceasefire. They've agreed to disarm. Do you think there is hope that these terrorist PKK in particular will put away violence away for good?
No, I think that's the history of the PKK, YPG has been delay, 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 delay. So now they've negotiated for 14 more days, but we've seen during the past 4 days what they were doing. During the past 4 days, they've been bringing in Kurdish fighters from Iraq and Iran and they've tried to come over from Turkey, but Turkey has had much better control over their border, try to come into Syria to kill Syrians, to take territory, to prevent the legitimate Syrian government from taking control of these areas and establishing some authority. So this agreement, this ceasefire or whatever you want to call it, is really just another delay strategy. This is a group that already has a proven history of failure, of inability to change, except to change its colors by being a chameleon of changing its name, one day being the YPG, one day being the PKK, one day being the SDF. Now they're trying to rebrand again, we've seen, um, to become Kurdistan. So now they're no longer saying Rojava. Now they're saying that this is about Kurdish rights in Kurdistan. And they're flying the flag of Kurdistan. And we're seeing that Barzani in Iraq is trying to create trouble in Syria. So the reason, part of this is about money as well. Barzani, I mean, this is a mafia that controls the Kurdistan region of Iraq, has been profiting from the oil from Syria. They want to continue profiting. This is about a criminal enterprise in some ways as well. So they're, sometimes I refer to them as a death cult, but it's also a mafia that is stealing money from Syria.
Yeah, I'm sure if they were here, they would profoundly disagree with your comments there, and we'll obviously open the line to them to come on and give an alternative viewpoint. I just want to move on. Obviously, we've got the situation in Gaza. We see the final Israeli hostage, if you want to call him that, the body that was taken on October the 7th, has finally been discovered and taken back to Israel. Israel has agreed to open the Rafah crossing. Palestinians are demanding increased aid and increased movement, whilst President Trump has set up this board of peace, which doesn't have any Palestinian representatives. How do you see this situation in Gaza developing?
I think that the Palestinians are being forced into this board of peace that really doesn't represent anyone. It's a money-making opportunity for Jared Kushner. I mean, I don't want to be negative about it, because the Palestinians have already had so much of a hard time. But to call this anything but a money grab for Kushner, arranged by Trump, I think is misleading. No serious government has put anything into this. Turkey has made sure that it has some role, but it has to keep pushing to have a larger role. Otherwise, all we're going to see in Gaza is a bunch of Israeli casinos and hotels on the beaches, and the Palestinians pushed out. Sadly, I think that's the direction that this is going in. It's good to see that the final Israeli hostage is accounted for, so that we can finally stop talking about hostages and talking about the Palestinians and their rights. But I don't think that this board of peace is a serious move forward.
Of entire families wiped out, hospitals collapsing, children dying from hunger and preventable injuries, but also in the cold nights of winter. At what point does this stop being called a conflict and start being recognized as a moral catastrophe and potentially a genocide?
Oh, I don't think any nation has recognized what's happened here. It's still a matter of pretending that what happened hasn't happened. No one is doing anything serious to change what's happening in Gaza, and that includes Saudi Arabia, Turkey, etc. I think Turkey is trying through this board of peace thing to have some influence. But the reality is that Israel is not susceptible to influence from its neighbors, from Europe, etc. whenever anyone tries to influence the direction Israel is going in, Netanyahu just says they're anti-Semitic. This is going to take some time to change, and I don't know that it will change before they've changed the facts on the ground enough that it can't be pushed back or changed back to a Palestinian territory.
Israel would argue that they were attacked on October the 7th. They saw over 1,200 of their citizens being killed or injured, and they have a right to self-defense. Does Israel have a right to self-defense?
I think it exercised its right of self-defense 2 years ago. I mean, wasn't that right of self-defense over in a week after that? Once they pushed the Hamas terrorists back, I think that this has been milked like a cow over and over and over and over and over. Certainly nobody was sad to see innocent civilians attacked. However, the price the Palestinians have paid for what Hamas did is extraordinary. It's really a very lopsided situation. We talk about the Israeli victims, and we never once take into account the Palestinian victims. We never once look at what has happened to Gaza or put this in some sort of balanced perspective. What has happened to the Palestinians is what we should be talking about. We've talked enough about what has happened to the Israelis. I am very saddened for every one of those families that lost a loved one, but that's been talked about enough, I think.
Yeah. Obviously, you're in the United States, and we've seen an increased level of support for Palestinians and the Palestinian cause, not just traditionally amongst those on the left. We are seeing huge numbers of people on the right, MAGA supporters, Tucker Carlson and others, who've suddenly seen the light on Gaza. Do you think this is a significant change in level of support for Israel and its government in the United States?
So when we talk about the support on the right for Palestinians, I think that we need to clarify as to whether that is support for the Palestinians or hate of Israelis and Jews. I don't think it's support for Palestinians. They don't express support for Palestinians. They don't try to make Palestinians' lives better. That's not what that is about. That is something that goes back to the time of Patrick Buchanan. There's always been a strain on the right amongst conservatives, amongst the GOP, against Israel. And that is because they don't believe that that Israel, being an ally of Israel, is being America first. And I think that's a very strong argument that being an ally with Israel is not in America's benefit. This is just a recognition of the fact that America has paid a very high price for being an ally of Israel to the extent of losing much of the world. When we vote in the UN, we often vote alone. When we want to get things in the Middle East, we can't because Israel is our ally, because Israel is feeding us misinformation or bad intelligence. This price that America has paid for being an ally of Israel has been extraordinary again. And, this is just a recognition on the right of that reality, but that doesn't make them pro-Palestinian or concerned about Palestinians. And I think it's very unlikely that you're going to see any benefit to the Palestinians from that. Just like you don't see any benefit to the Palestinians from the left. These people on the far left that support the Palestinian cause, do they really support the Palestinian cause? Because they don't support Palestinians when they're getting killed elsewhere in Syria or in other circumstances. They only care when it's Israel killing Palestinians.
Yeah. Do you think the United States has lost its moral credibility, if you like, on human rights after its support for Israel and other activities they've done in Venezuela, You could argue the military strikes in Iran last year,
Right.
possible further strikes, allegations around that.
You know, I used to like to say that the difference between the United States was Russia is that both Russia and the United States does bad things in the world. We both make mistakes, but at least the United States isn't trying to do bad things. And we might do all of the wrong things, but eventually get to doing the right thing. It's just that we have this history of making all of the mistakes until we can figure out how to do the right thing. But I think now we've arrived at a point with Trump as president where we do all the wrong things knowingly. And I think we can look at what's happening in Minnesota to establish that clearly. This is not an accident, what's happening in Minnesota. You know, this was a plan. This was a plan to attack Minneapolis. This was a plan to attack Somalis. This was a plan to create a divide between white Americans and everyone else, or maybe we should call them Mayflower Americans and everyone else. This was a plan. A lot of these people that are hired by ICE, that are committing these illegal acts, that are committing this violence in Minneapolis, these are pardoned January 6th protesters who we were previously referring to as treasonous and traitors trying to overturn the American government and undermine our electoral system.
So those federal immigration agents would argue that they are doing their job, and anybody who tries to interfere in that job is liable to be arrested, or if they're a threat, to protect themselves from that. We've seen that shooting only this weekend, huge crowds coming out across Minnesota. What should our viewers here in the UK and watching this in Europe and the Middle East and Pakistan and other places, how would you describe what has happened, and how this will develop in the days and weeks to come?
So what is happening now is about putting Americans in their place. This is not about America first, because you can't shoot Americans and saying you're trying to make America first. These people that are being shot in the streets, these people are being harassed, beaten, thrown to the ground, gassed. These are Americans. They're not people that are any different than myself. What they're trying to do here is they're trying to pursue Stephen Miller's agenda of creating a caste system almost of Americans, where people can be denaturalized because they're not Mayflower Americans going back, 5 generations, to being pilgrims. This is really an obscene development, and it goes to show you that the rule of law in America is really under attack, because what's allowed this to happen is, what Judge Kavanaugh did in the Supreme Court to allow what we call Kavanaugh stops. In other words, the questioning of somebody that isn't even suspected of committing a crime.
Yeah, that's really fascinating, because there's now a dangerous normalization of armed enforcement against minority and migrant communities in the United States. And that's that two-tier justice system that we often hear about. But the 2 people who've been killed are not from those migrant communities. They're not Somalians, they're not Muslims, but they are just everyday Americans who cared enough to want to be there to try to protect some of those victims.
Right. So they're victims because they were standing with the people that Trump and Stephen Miller wanted to be victims. I mean, that's what it comes down to. There are a lot of decent Americans that still believe in the values upon which this nation was established, and those values still exist in the minds of many of us here. So many of us will continue to stand for brown, black people, anyone that has been othered or that is trying to be that the Trump administration is trying to marginalize. So, sadly, that fight will be by white people, people that are American citizens, because those are the ones who can do that fight. If somebody is on a green card or is here legally, we've seen that the Trump administration will revoke their green card, will take away their TPS, will make them go from being legal to being illegal without any cause, simply because they don't like
Yeah.
their views or opinions. As we saw with many of the Palestinian students that were protesting on colleges' campuses. These people were all legal, but Marco Rubio's excuse for arresting them and putting them into deportation proceedings is that he doesn't agree with his view, with their views. He's taken away
Yeah.
their freedom of speech, essentially.
Yeah. Sorry to interrupt, but our lines are open on 0121 285 1845. Let's go to the lines. Let's see who's on line one. Assalamu alaikum. You're live on Takbeer TV.
Hello. Hello, can you hear
Assalamu
me?
alaikum, brother. I can, yeah. Go ahead, my sir. What's your question?
I heard in the news that President Trump wants a regime change in Iran. Do you think he will succeed in that? Because there's been a lot of news about it regarding Iran's present situation. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your question there. Hamdi, I mean, this build-up of US forces, there's a frigate that has just arrived in the Middle East from the South China Sea. Further military build-up. We've had the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Oman, Bahrain, saying that they would not allow their territory to be used or their airspace to use to attack Iran. What is going on? What's your thoughts? Do you think there's some sort of plan to attempt to regime change in Iran?
Well, of course, the United States has always wanted regime change in Iran. This is no secret. The question is, and I had said this earlier, be careful what you wish for, you may get it. Iran is a country not made up of one ethnic community. It's a country where the Iranian government has been suppressing ethnic communities. There are Turks, there are Azeris, there are Arabs, there are Kurds, and they were all controlled by a government that was Persian, that now has Azeris at the head of it. So, there's some real questions here about what might happen if the Iranian government fell apart. Having said that, the Iranian government has been the main destabilizing force throughout the Middle East since its revolution. So, we have to ask ourselves, is it more of a security risk? Is it going to create more instability if the current government remains, or will it create more instability if the country falls apart? If the current government, if there is regime change, is there going to be an Iran in its current form as we know it, or is it going to break into pieces? The Iranian people certainly don't seem to want their government to remain. So this is not regime change that is just manufactured by the United States. There are plenty of Iranians that don't want it. Having said that, the Iranians themselves are not one group, even in the diaspora. You have the Pahlavi people, you have the MEK, you have Iranian Jews that are so extreme that God forbid they came to power. Can you imagine what Iran might look like? It would be much more hostile and violent than Israel is currently. There are some real issues here as to what the outcome might be for the whole world if Iran was to fall apart.
Yeah. Let's go back to the lines. Let's go to the next caller. Assalamu alaikum. You're live on Takbeer TV. What's your question or comment?
Walaikum assalam. The peace board and the inclusion of countries like Pakistan, Indonesia, and Turkey, will it make the life for Gazans and Palestinians any better?
Yeah, it's a really powerful point. Thank you for that question. Hamdi, I mean, the sense that Pakistan and many other governed Muslim countries have now joined President Trump's Board of Peace. Will this have any impact on making lives better for the Palestinians on the ground in Gaza and the occupied West Bank and East Jerusalem?
So Mohammed, I'm sure you've heard this saying, If you're not at the table, you're on the menu. So Turkey, Pakistan, and others need to be at the table. Even if they don't like that table, even if they don't like who they're sitting with, even if they don't like the purpose of that dinner, they need to be at that table. Whether it's going to actually make the lives of Palestinians better is an unknown now, because nobody can know how this is going to play out. But if we're not at the table, then I can guarantee you the Palestinians will remain on the menu.
Yeah, okay. As I said, the lines are still open, so 0121-285-1845 is the number of the studio here on Takbeer TV. You're watching Outlook with me, Mohammed Shafiq, my special guest, Hamdi Rafai, joining us live from Washington, D.C. Hamdi, critics have said Donald Trump's approach has emboldened hard-right political parties and policies, both at home and abroad. Supporters of Donald Trump say he's standing firm and bringing the change he promised when he stood in the election last year. From Washington, which narrative is winning?
Well, I think that if we look at the statements that were published in the media about the private conversations from Ted Cruz, clearly there's what's talked about publicly, and there's the private reality. The private reality is Trump is failing. He's losing his support within the party. And even people that want to support him are finding it almost impossible to support him. So we saw Ted Cruz saying that Trump is leading the Republicans to losing all of their seats in the midterm, and Trump will be on the menu being impeached for the next 2 years after that. And we saw that the
It didn't
Republican
work last time,
candidate
did
for
it?
governor in Minnesota, I'm sorry, Mohammed?
I was just saying it didn't work last time, this impeachment. He was impeached twice and still came back and won the presidential election. So maybe that's not an option.
Well, he didn't win the immediate presidential election, but I think that in the midterms last time he was president, we saw that he also lost seats. And so I think it's very clear that he is going to lose seats, and Republicans are dropping out of races. The Minnesota Republican candidate for governor announced today that he's not even going to run. He terminated his candidacy for governor. He said in his own words that the federal government had put Minnesota under attack. That's a GOP candidate.
That's I did read that story this afternoon. I thought I had to read it again second time, because I thought, is this really a Republican? But actually, you're absolutely right. It has stepped down. How do you
Privately,
see
all
these
Republicans are
next
saying
few?
that this is untenable.
Yeah, so Senator Ted Cruz saying something in private, what many of them are also saying. That was the call that was leaked at the weekend. How do you see the next 8-9 months developing as we head towards those midterms? Do you think Donald Trump will be able, because he tried this redistribution, robbing seats and realigning that, and obviously trying to put a lot of pressure on Republicans to toe his line. How do you see the campaign developing? Not so much the result just yet, we could talk about that in a second, but how do you see the campaign developing by the Democrats, but also by the Republicans?
So Trump sent Tom Hooman to Minnesota today. And that tells you everything. That tells you Trump is afraid. That tells you Trump is watching those opinion polls. He sees that Americans don't approve of what he's doing. And he recognizes that he needs to shake the boat yet again. If there's anything that's true about Trump, is he can change the narrative in the snap of a finger, and he does.
Yeah.
So there are outrageous things happening right now, and tomorrow he will do something even more outrageous that will then shift that public opinion, because people will be forced to forget that his administration shot Americans in the street, and that is not America first. So he can shift this narrative faster than any political figure, I think, in world history, because he's never held to account for what he does. To predict what will happen in the next 9 months until the actual election is a fool's errand. However, We know that past his prologue, and we know that regardless of what Trump does, Democrats will gain seats. The question is, will they gain enough seats that they can take control of the government back from the GOP? That's the real question, not whether, uh, you know, uh, whether Trump will be able to change the narrative, change the polls, get Republicans elected. He'll be able to get Republicans elected because Americans seem to have have no memory of it at all, honestly.
Yeah, it's just a extraordinary phenomenon that Donald Trump is. The Democrats were comprehensively rejected in 2024. Kamala Harris lost. They lost the House. The Senate was gone. Lost governors. It was a real rejection of their foreign policy, but also their domestic record under President Biden. How do you see the Democrats in this coming year?
Well, see, that's really, you've really hit upon the unknown there. Democrats have not been able to find a footing. They don't have a leader. They don't have a position. They don't know where they need to be. Whether you're talking about a congressman from Virginia or you're talking about the Gavin Newsom in California as the governor, you know, they're all trying different things. They don't know what will stick. Nothing seems to stick against Trump. And that's the battle that they're fighting. And they haven't even, I think, recognized their own failures from the past. For example, we saw Kamala Harris's book come out, and it pointed the fingers at others to try to clean her record. And then we saw Governor Shapiro's book come out that tried to point the record and bring back this whole Israel issue, accusing him of being an agent for Israel by the Kamala campaign. You know, they can't get along with others, so certainly they can't present any kind of united front to the American public. And I mean, that's been a problem that they've had for a long time. They talk about things, but their actual actions are very different from what they talk about. People embrace Trump because, for the most part, although what he says is offensive, well, at least he's doing what he says he's going to do in many cases.
Yeah.
For the Democrats, that's rarely true. They say one thing and they do something else. And we saw that with, Brett McGurk in Syria, for example. To take it full circle, Brett McGurk is the one who created this fiction of the SDF and put America into bed with a terror group, something that most Americans can't even get their head around and accept.
We've probably got about 4 minutes left, and I've just got some very quick fire questions, if you don't mind. So do you think the Democrats will win the House and the Senate?
I think they will. If I have to make a prediction, yes, they will. There's too many bad things that have happened. And even with the Democrats not being able to get themselves together, as I said, past his prologue, they will gain seats in the midterms. The question is how many.
Yeah. Okay. We're gonna record this and play it back to you after the elections results are out in early November to see whether your
I'm always wrong. I don't know that's going to be useful.
I know. So, and then I suppose the next question is obviously the attention straight away after midterms turns to the presidential election in 2028. We think we know who the Republican candidate's going to be. It's most likely to be J.D. Vance, the vice president. Marco Rubio's got behind him as well, as will the establishment, and Trump has said he favors him. How do you see the Democrats? Do you think it's Gavin Newsom versus J.D. Vance?
No, I don't see that at all. It's way too early to predict, but both of them have really big problems. There are a lot of the Republican Party that are going after J.D. Vance and cannot see him as the candidate for president. And a lot of what J.D. Vance did to become vice president is going to come back and bite him very hard if he tries to run for president. For example, that whole cats and dogs, they're eating the cats and dogs thing. I mean, the Democrats are going to be running commercials of him, saying they're eating the cats and dogs day in and day out. making him almost unelectable. He said too many things like that. You know, his defense of the murder of Americans by ICE agents, that is not going to play to his favor. That is going to make him in many ways unelectable. All of the things that are causing Trump to lose support are the things that Trump put J.D. Vance out front on, that J.D. Vance has had to do in order to maintain his position as vice president, that will not serve him well running for president. As for Gavin Newsom has done a shift. You know, I mean, the reality is, he's shifted towards the center to become more of a viable candidate for the Democratic Party. But the Democratic Party still has this tension between the center and the progressives. He was a progressive. He's tried to move to the center so that he can be the Democratic Party's candidate. But the question is, where are the progressives going to be and who's going to control this party?
Yeah, well, that's a fascinating question on which we are going to have to finish. I'm sure we'll get you back to see whether those predictions are right. And obviously, there's a big debate. We're not even talked about Zohran Mamdani and his first few weeks as the New York mayor. Hamdi Rafai, thank you so much, my friend. Good to see you. And keep safe during this very difficult weather that you're experiencing on the East Coast of the United States.
Always a pleasure to talk with you, Mohammed. Thank you for having me on.
God bless you, sir. Thank you so much. That was Hamdi Rafai, a foreign policy expert, joining us live from Washington, D.C. And as I said, in the weeks and months to come, we'll be concentrating on the US elections and what it means, not just for us here in the UK, but also how it means for the global economy as well. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's the end of another program. I'll be back same time next week at 7 o'clock on a Monday with a new guest, a new topic, but most familiarly, myself. Thank you so much to the team behind the scenes. From me, Mohammed Shafiq, and the whole team here at Takbeer TV. Thank you so much for joining us. I'll see you very, very soon. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.